saw a familiar face walking on the avenue. Both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced.
Hello again. Welcome to another show, Gung Ho. It's April 10th, 2023. I have a guest here, actually a special friend, Jeff Sussman. We've done many shows together. He is a very prolific author. His expertise, I think, is in boxing and mob, gangsters, mafia, things like that. We have some interest in common. Anyhow, he's here today to talk about his new book, Sin City Gangsters, which got to be incredible. I mean, all right, Jeff, let's start. What I want to know is, to begin, whose idea was it to go out to Las Vegas and do this in the very beginning?
Las Vegas made gambling, or the state of Nevada made gambling legal in 1931. And so you had a lot of independent people running saloons, with sawdust on the floor, and sort of cowboy saloons, up until the end of World War II. And then the Eastern mob, the Lucianos, the Meyer Lanskys, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello, they decided to move into Las Vegas. And a man named Billy Wilkerson, who owned the Hollywood Reporter magazine and some high-class restaurants in Beverly Hills, started building a casino called the Flamingo. And it was modeled on a kind of Monte Carlo type fancy casino that would appeal to very wealthy people. However, he ran out of money in the process of building it. And banks wouldn't lend money because they thought casinos were too risky. So he had to borrow money from the mob and to finish the casino. And they gave him the money, but they took over 80%.
Is that when Bugsy Siegel got involved?
Yes.
You're going to go into that a little bit?
Yeah.
Right.
So the mob came in, and they put Bugsy Siegel in charge of running their interest in the casino. He had originally been in Los Angeles running the racing wire for them that all bookies had to subscribe to. And so they sent him to Las Vegas to oversee the building, the completion of the Flamingo Hotel. And they formed a corporation, and they gave Billy Wilkerson 20% of the corporation, and they retained 80%. But they wanted 100%. So they told Billy Wilkerson that he had to sell them his 20%, and he refused to do it. So Bugsy Siegel threatened to kill him. And he was frightened. So Billy Wilkerson went to Europe and lived in Europe for a year, having already given them his 20%. So now the mob owned 100% of the Flamingo. And Bugsy and his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, were overseeing the construction of it. And Bugsy was a kind of very erratic guy with a very violent temper. And if things didn't go right, he threatened to kill people and so forth. And he hired this guy named Del Webb to finish the construction for him. And Del Webb saw what an irrational, hot-tempered person Bugsy Siegel could be. So he went to Bugsy Siegel and he said, if I make a terrible mistake here or anything, are you going to kill me? And Bugsy Siegel said, no, we only kill each other. We never kill civilians.
But I remember about Bugsy Siegel, he spent a lot of time in Hollywood.
That was before he got involved with Las Vegas.
Why would you put Virginia Hill in charge of that?
Well, they were a very strange couple. They were always fighting with each other.
But he was married.
He was married. His wife was in Westchester County in New York. He eventually divorced her and secretly married Virginia Hill in Mexico.
Wow.
But she was a very neurotic woman also. She tried to commit suicide 4 or 5 times.
But she was very beautiful, right?
Very beautiful. She had been a courier for the outfit in Chicago. She carried money back and forth to a bookie in Chicago who worked for the outfit named Joe Epstein. And she had been a girlfriend of one of the Fischetti brothers who were related to Al Capone in running the outfit. She had had an affair with Joe Adonis in New York. And
Adonis, the one that got killed by, was that?
no, Adonis was ultimately deported. And his real last name was Dodo, or Dado, but he thought he was so handsome that he didn't like that name, that he changed his last name to Adonis.
Was Virginia Hill an actress or a showgirl? Or?
She came from a poor family in the South, and I think she had 8 or 9 siblings. They were very poor. You know, she didn't have shoes or anything, and she decided she wanted to make something of her life. So she went to Chicago when there was a World's Fair going on, and she got a job there as a dancer. And then she was also working as a hooker there, and she met the Fischetti brothers, and they thought that they could use her as a courier because no one would suspect a woman of carrying illegal funds for the mob. So they had her going back and forth between New York and Chicago and Miami, Chicago and Philadelphia. And on one of his return trips to New York, Bugsy Siegel met Virginia Hill at a nightclub in New York, and they had a very brief affair. But she said her affair with Bugsy Siegel was the best sex she ever had in her life.
Good for him, and both.
Good for him, right. And so then, you know, she went out to, she had a friend who was trying to be an actress and invited Virginia Hill to come to Hollywood and try to become an actress also. And she became an extra in movies. She never had any lines in anything, but she was always part of a crowd scene or something.
Were they together in Hollywood?
Well, Bugsy met her again in Hollywood because he was a very good friend of the actor George Raft. And he was on a set. George Raft would invite Bugsy Siegel to come and watch the acting on the set because Bugsy Siegel basically wanted to be a movie star. And he was very handsome. And a lot of movie stars told him that he had the makings of a star. You know, people like Cary Grant, others. And however, he had a very fragile ego. He had George Raft make a movie of him acting. And George Raft said, "Now you should take this around and show it to directors and producers." But Bugsy Siegel never did that because he was frightened that he would be rejected. And he couldn't stand being rejected about anything. So he never showed it to anybody. But he always had this dream of being an actor. And George Raft encouraged him, but it never worked out. And then when Billy Wilkerson came begging for money to finish The Flamingo, the mob looked upon this as an opportunity. Because they already owned a couple of cowboy saloons in Vegas. But they realized that something that could really attract sort of the upper classes of Los Angeles, because it was so close to Las Vegas, that they would come and they would gamble and spend a lot of money.
The Flamingo was quite an establishment. It was something, right?
It was the first big fancy casino in Las Vegas. The others were more like old-fashioned cowboy saloons.
Is the Flamingo still there?
No, that was knocked down. It was knocked down to build these monster hotel casinos that are there now. A lot of the old casinos were knocked down.
I know something went wrong and Bugsy got killed because of it. What happened?
Well, he and Virginia was skimming money.
Who? Both of them?
Both of them were skimming money from the mob. It was supposed to cost $1 million to finish the Flamingo, and it wound up costing $6 million. And the mob realized where all that money was going. It was going into Swiss bank accounts run by Virginia and Bugsy. So they told Bugsy he had to return the money, otherwise they would kill him. So he said, "Wait, we'll have a grand opening and everything will be successful." And they had a grand opening, and the weather was bad and nobody came and there were problems with the hotel. So they postponed the grand opening, and then they had another grand opening a while later. And nobody ever heard of this. The casino lost money. People were winning left and right, which made the mob think that someone is cheating them. Casinos don't lose money. George Raft tried to help out by losing $60,000 at the casino to help his friend, but it didn't do any good. And they were finally disgusted with Bugsy. And there's been a lot of supposition about who actually killed Bugsy. But a man named Ralph Natale, who was head of the mob family in Philadelphia, said that everybody in the mob knew that a man named Frankie Carbo pulled the trigger and killed Bugsy. And they had been friends and partners, Bugsy Siegel and Frankie Carbo, because Frankie Carbo had been a member of Murder Incorporated, along with Bugsy Siegel in the 1930s, and they had committed a lot of murders together. And when they needed to kill a guy who was going to rat them out, a guy named Big Greenie Greenberg, it was Bugsy and Frankie Carbo and a man named Tic Tac Tannenbaum who killed Big Greenie. But the mob felt that, if we want to get close to Bugsy and kill him, we should use somebody who Bugsy knows and is a friend of his and he'll trust.
What about the money in the Swiss accounts?
Well, Virginia Hill then controlled all the money. So she moved to Europe. She was actually in Europe at the time that Bugsy was killed. And they were tracking her down, and eventually they sent Meyer Lansky to her, and they told her that you have to return the money or we're going to kill you. And she had a little boy at that time also. She had married a ski instructor. And so she returned all the money.
Wow.
And then a few months later, she committed suicide, killed herself.
But oh my God! And the boy was it Bugsy's? No.
No, it was the ski instructor's son. Bugsy had two daughters, Melissa and Barbara, and they're both dead now. But all those big flashy signs that are in Las Vegas, that are on top of the casinos. Bugsy's daughter, Melissa, owned a business that created all those flashy signs in Las Vegas. So even though Bugsy was gone, his daughter was sort of tangentially still connected to Las Vegas until she died.
So who were the main movers then in the Flamingo? You mentioned Meyer Lansky, right?
Well, Meyer Lansky owned points in about 10 or 12 different casinos in Las Vegas. But the mob then sent two men to run the casino for them, a man named Gus Greenbaum and a guy named Mo Sedway. They had both been with the mob. Mo Sedway had been with the East Coast mob, and Gus Greenbaum had been with the outfit in Chicago. And Gus Greenbaum was brilliant. He turned lead into gold.
All right, this guy wasn't Italian though.
No, neither of these two guys were Italian.
They were Jews.
They were Jews, right? But Gus Greenbaum made a $4 million profit at the casino in just 6 months. So the mob loved him, and then they installed him to run another casino and he did that beautifully. And then he decided he wanted to retire. He had enough money and so forth. He moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where he became a good friend of Senator Barry Goldwater, and went into business with Barry Goldwater's nephew. But the mob wanted him to come back to Las Vegas because he was such a brilliant moneymaker for them, and he wouldn't go. And they kept threatening him, and he still wouldn't go. So they killed his sister-in-law.
Oh my God!
And he got the message. So when they did that, he went back to Las Vegas. But when he went back to Las Vegas, he became a heroin addict. And he began skimming money from the skim that was supposed to go back to the outfit in Chicago. And he was using this skimmed money for prostitutes and for heroin. And the mob told him that, look, we want you to stay here, we want you to run things, but you have to return all the money that you skimmed from us. So we'll forget about it if you return it. We won't hurt you or anything. And he said, no, I'm not doing it, and I'm going back to Phoenix. I've had enough. I'm not going to stay here. And he went back to Phoenix, and he didn't return the money. And the mob sent 2 hitmen to him in Phoenix, Arizona. And they killed him in the middle of the night. They cut his throat, and they almost severed his head from his body. It was right down to the spinal cord. And his wife was in the house, so they killed his wife, too.
Wow, this is unlike the mob to do something
Well,
like that.
the Chicago mob was really much more vicious than the East Coast mob. And they were known for being vicious. And they would kill a guy's wife and children. I mean, they didn't care. I mean, they were really...
What happened to the other guy?
Mo Sedgwick was kind of like a very straight-laced guy. You know, he was always wearing 3-piece suits, always very deferential. He stayed in Las Vegas and ran things for the mob until he died of old age. You know, he was called before the McClellan Rackets Committee, and he just nervously answered questions, and nothing happened to him.
He was just hired to run the place, and so he's not on any of. He didn't only have an interest in the place.
Now, he had a couple of points here and there.
A couple of points.
Yeah, but the most brilliant of all of these people that I found, and it's a gangster that most people don't even know about, was a guy named Mo Dalitz, who came out of Cleveland. He ran the syndicate in Cleveland, and he started out as a bootlegger during Prohibition, and then when Prohibition ended, he opened gambling casinos in Kentucky and Indiana. And then he went into the Army in World War II and had a very illustrious career. He worked his way up in the ranks. He went from being a private to being a lieutenant. And because he had this experience with casinos, he decided that he was going to build a casino in Las Vegas. He knew about the Flamingo. And he had been a friend for a long time of Jimmy Hoffa, who was head of the Teamsters Union. And he went to Hoffa, and Hoffa said, we'll give you all the money you need from the Central States Pension Fund to build the Desert Inn. And he built, with 3 of his Cleveland gangster partners, he built the Desert Inn Hotel and Casino. And that became like a landmark, a casino. And then he built other casinos in Las Vegas. And here's a guy who really, I mean, he was the biggest mobster in Las Vegas, and he never spent a day in jail. He was so smart.
Something bad happened to Jimmy Hoffa, though.
Yeah, well, that was for a different reason, though. But to give you an idea of how powerful Mo Dalitz was, he was invited to the presidential inaugurations of Richard Nixon, of Ronald Reagan. He controlled Senator McCarran, who was the a Republican senator from Nevada. And there was a guy that the mob sent to overlook their skim. The outfit controlled 4 casinos in Las Vegas. The biggest one that they controlled was the Stardust. And they controlled 3 others, the Hacienda and the Fremont.
Explain to our audience the skim, what was going on.
Well, each casino had a count room where all the money that was lost in gambling was taken into the count room and counted. And it was supposed to be reported to the IRS, how much money. But the outfit had no intention of reporting all this money. They would report maybe a tenth of it. So they would skim off most of the money. And they had couriers, and they would send the money to all the people who owned points in the various casinos. So the outfit sent a man named Johnny Roselli.
That's the name I was.
Yeah, to Las Vegas to oversee their interest in the skim. And Roselli, he was very handsome. He was a man about town. He dated beautiful women. And Mo Dalitz felt that Johnny Roselli was pushing himself too much into his territory.
They were doing the same thing, right?
Yeah. So he invited Johnny Roselli to come and have lunch with him one day. And there was another man. All 3 of them were having lunch. And a deputy sheriff comes in and he says to Johnny Roselli, could you step outside for a minute? I want to talk to you. And Johnny Roselli says, I'm not stepping outside with you. Get lost. And 5 minutes later, the sheriff comes in, Sheriff Lamb, and he grabs Johnny Roselli by the collar and he drags him out and he throws him into jail for 24 hours. He tells him, you never resist one of my deputies. When a deputy tells you what to do, you better do it. He was a very tough guy, this sheriff. And Mo Dalitz and his friend just continued talking as if nothing happened. The point was that Mo Dalitz was showing Johnny Roselli, I'm the boss in Las Vegas. I control the sheriff. I control all the politics. You better not try to impinge on my territory or I'm going to have you thrown in jail. And Johnny Roselli got the message.
What did he do?
Johnny Roselli backed off. He realized that he couldn't interfere with what Mo Dalitz was doing. Mo Dalitz was too powerful, and he couldn't interfere with him.
Roselli, then is that the guy that wound up with Lana Turner, or who was that?
No, Johnny Roselli was actually killed because he got involved with Sam Giancana and the CIA in attempting the assassination of Fidel Castro. And they also knew about facts that the mob didn't want anyone to know about the assassination of John Kennedy. So the week before, Johnny Roselli had been called to testify to a Senate committee, and he refused to implicate anyone or say anything, but the mob didn't know that, and he didn't ask permission from the mob to go and testify, so they didn't trust him. So Santos Trafficante, who was the mob boss of Florida, invited Johnny Roselli to go out fishing one day, and Santos Trafficante excused himself. He couldn't go on the boat. Something came, but two of Johnny Roselli's friends from the outfit in Chicago went on the boat with him. And Johnny Roselli suffered from emphysema. So one of these guys came up behind him and put his hand over his mouth and pinched his nostrils and asphyxiated Johnny Roselli. Then, just to make sure he was out, they hit him over the head. And they wanted to stuff him into an oil drum, but his body was too big to stuff into an oil drum. So they chopped off his arms and his legs, and they put the trunk and then they put the arms and the legs separately into the oil drum. And 2 weeks later, the oil drum was found floating in Biscayne Bay by a couple of fishermen. And then 2 weeks later, Sam Giancana was shot and killed at his home in Chicago while he was cooking sausages and peppers in the basement.
Incredible. All right, I just said they kill one another.
Right.
That's for sure.
And so anyway, Mo Dalitz became legitimate after a while, and he sold off all of. Oh, I have to tell you a funny story. In the late 1970s, I was during the Christmas holidays. I went on vacation to a place called La Costa in Southern California that someone had recommended to me. And while I was there, I met some people, and someone invited me to his home for a New Year's Eve celebration. And these homes were on the La Costa grounds. And I was standing in a living room, and I had a drink in my hand, and I'm standing next to an elderly man who has a drink in his hand, and he says, my back is killing me, I've got to sit down. So we both sit down on the couch, and I asked him, what he did for a living, and he said he used to own the Desert Inn hotel and casino with 3 partners. And he said, but we sold it. And I said, why did you sell it? And he said, well, Howard Hughes came to town in a germ-free sealed railroad car. It was taken by stretcher to the top floor, to the penthouse of the Desert Inn. And he had an entire entourage of Mormons. They neither drank nor gambled, so we were losing a lot of money, and they took the top 2 floors. So we said to Howard Hughes' emissary, he's got to either buy the place or move out. So the emissary went back to Howard Hughes and said, how much do they want for it? So this guy said to me, he said, well, we figure we'll tell him, we'll give him a price that's 4 times the value, and it'll be so much money, he'll say no and he'll move out. So Howard Hughes said, fine, I'll buy it. So he bought the Desert Inn, and these guys moved out. His name was Morris Kleinman, and he was a partner of Mo Dalitz and two other Jewish gangsters from Cleveland named, one was Lou Rothkopf, and I think the other one was named Robert Tucker.
So Howard Hughes takes over the casino.
And then he bought 12 more casinos.
He was. What about the skim for the mob?
Well, the four casinos that the outfit controlled, they were still skimming away like crazy there.
Oh, these were different. All right.
Yeah, he didn't buy any of the casinos that the outfit owned. He bought the casinos that he bought were the ones that Meyer Lansky, Mo Dalitz, and the Lucianos and Joe Adonis's owned.
But they were skimming too.
Of course they were
Everyone
skimming.
was skimming.
Everyone was skimming. That was the beauty of the thing, was that they were able to get away with skimming.
Oh, I think we went into another. Oh, no, we only have 2 minutes left. All right. Okay. I assume there came a time when the government the state of Nevada must have stepped in to monitor exactly what was going on in the, what do they call it, the count room?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Robert Kennedy was Attorney General at the time, and he had them wire these guys surreptitiously to get the information. But when their lawyers went to court, they said these wires were placed without a warrant. And so they're totally illegal. You can't use them. So the cases were all thrown out of court.
But the government was on to them.
The government was onto them, but they couldn't prosecute them. And then Robert Kennedy, after his brother was assassinated, he kind of, toned things down a little bit, and then he was no longer Attorney General, and then everything died.
Frankie Carbo, was that the guy? There was a guy involved in boxing.
Yeah.
Same guy.
Yeah, he was known as the czar of boxing.
And
he controlled.
Robert Kennedy went after him, though, right?
Eventually, Robert Kennedy was the one who put him in prison.
For a long time.
Yeah, he got 30 years, a sentence of 30 years, and his partner, Blinky Palermo, got 25 years.
That was the end of them. All right, we only got a few seconds left. We're going to keep going, all right, right after this.
Good.
It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, as usual.
I saw a familiar face walking on the avenue, both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do, as childhood